Greetings and welcome to you all of you who have a heart for the environment and can bear to look at what's happening these days with our beautiful earth. This is Creation in Crisis. We are sponsored by Creation Spirituality Communities, and we look at the nexus between spirituality, ecology, activism. When we started out, we really we were looking to tell us what's happening. We get people to say what's going on, and we would was more informational and kind of getting up to speed on what was happening in around the earth, but it was still like something that's going to be in the future. And then we have then we started to talk to activists, including Mark Steiner, about what they were doing in their particular field and what it's talking about international earth law, as well as what people are doing in their own neck of the woods. And then we realized suddenly that we're already in it. There's no talking about it coming anymore. We're already in it. And so we found ourselves drifting now into leaders like Michael Dowd, who can help us figure out what to do now that the climate and ecological collapse is happening. And so we welcome you to this conversation. It's continuing. My name is Gail Ransom. I am a Doctor of Ministry in Creation Spirituality, and I have come to this through a love of Earth, lifelong love of Earth. My partner and co-host is Penny Andrews. She's going to be leading most of the meeting today. Penny also has a doctorate in Creation Spirituality, and she is on the board of directors of Creation Spirituality Communities. And our
morning, Boris Johnson lost his grip on power as the list of departing ministers and aides tipped over 50. The crisis around what he knew of complaints of sexual misconduct against the deputy chief whip, leading to his resignation as Tory leader.
Okay.
Government,
I'm looking.
Can we mute? Do you think everyone can mute?
They have no integrity.
I can't see who it is that's talking. So there we go. First internet fun. And so our stalwart, fabulous technical support is by Bob Eisenberger, who is from Toronto. And Bob has studied creation spirituality and Matthew Fox's work for decades and is a leader in the Ruach community there in Toronto. So we work on this every month and bring it to you. And we're glad you're with us today. And I'll turn the meeting now over to Penny Andrews.
Hello, everyone. And I've been given the notice that my internet is unstable, so I may have to stop video and be just a voice. But it is my terrific pleasure to welcome someone I've known for 2 decades, who shares the same birthday as I do, and whose evolving spirit has taken him places very few others have gone. When I met Michael and Connie, they were itinerant travelers for the universe story, and they opened thousands of people's eyes to the unitive narrative of our time. Michael has spoken to nearly 3,000 religious and secular groups throughout North America over the past 20 years. These include Roman Catholic, Protestant, UU, Evangelical, New Thought, and Jewish congregations, as well as humanist, skeptic, and free thinker groups. He's been in educational institutions and been keynoters at summer camps, clergy retreats, and denominational gatherings. He is a best-selling religious naturalist, eco-theologian, TEDx speaker, and pro-future advocate. His works have been published in all the major newspapers in the country. His book, Thank God for Evolution, was endorsed by 6 Nobel laureates and other science luminaries. And he's spoken at the UN and conducted 2 previous online conversation series the advent of evolutionary Christianity and the future's calling us to greatness. Michael's and Connie's generosity of information and insight have been consistent throughout this. He has two major websites, The Great Story and Post Doom, and I recommend them both highly because there is a body of work that is so extraordinary and so useful. Highly recommended. And in the spirit of gratitude ongoing, I turn this over to Michael for being here.
Thank you, Penny. Thanks. And I just took out 6 slides because you did such a great introduction. I didn't need to introduce myself, so that was great. So let me go to screen share here. All right, and move this down here. So creation and crisis, the big picture, what every Earth activist needs to know. I'm Michael Dowd, and I've been invited generously to present both today and also a month from now. So I'll be focusing on a little bit more of the content in terms of the really essential things to know, to not go crazy in these otherwise crazy making times. And then the session in August will be, we'll also cover some of the practical stuff today, but much more practical and dealing with some of the, how do we adapt and cope and support each other in that. So the big picture, I hate it when somebody announces that they're going to do X, Y, and Z, and then they sort of forget in the 8 months that it was that between the time when they said that and when they actually present. So I reread and decided to include here the description that I offered to Penny and the others. So no one needs convincing that creation is in crisis. Even those with no understanding of the unstoppable nature of biospheric and civilizational collapse feel the stress. Just to read or watch the propaganda formerly known as the news these days is a sobering or unsobering experience. How do we cope? How do we stay inspired? And perhaps most importantly, how can we be a blessing to others who are confused, angry, depressed, or filled with fear, guilt, blame, regret, or grief? What elements of eco-mysticism are most vital, and which aspects of the great story are most relevant for staying sane, grateful, and on purpose in these most challenging of times? And what special tools and gifts do those of us grounded in the epic of evolution and creation spirituality have to offer? So here's just an outline of what the main points that I'll be covering both this session and next. The truly unstoppable nature of biospheric and civilizational collapse. Unfortunately, this is something that a lot of activists don't know, and that's one of the reasons why they go crazy. The most relevant aspects of eco-mysticism and the great story, the universe story, or epic of evolution, big history. In other words, the most empowering insights of creation spirituality and the epic of evolution. How can we stay positive and inspiring? Notice I say inspiring for others. How do we be hope for others rather than clinging to hope for ourselves? Even at Teotihuacan, that is the end of the world as we know it. And make no mistake, we are at Teotihuacan. It may not be the end of the world full stop, but it's surely the end of this set of living arrangements that we've been used to for not just hundreds of years, but actually thousands of years. And the gifts that we can offer our communities, the world, and the future. So who am I? Why should anyone care what I have to say? Well, I'm not going to cover the kinds of things that Penny just covered, but I do want to mention this is really an essential point, that I'm an eco-theologian. That is, ecology is the heart of my theology. And we really need to untrivialize God and demythologize faith. I mean, your God is whatever you put your faith or your trust in, your ultimate concern. And this isn't just Michael Dowd saying this, arguably the most influential Protestant theologian of the 20th century, Paul Tillich, famously identified faith as your ultimate concern. So if your ultimate concern is technology or the market or human progress, that's your God. And what I suggest is that every sustainable, truly sustainable civilization, not civilization, every truly sustainable culture or society in human nature prioritized whatever you want to call this, what we would call in secular language, the biosphere or Gaia, or in other words, our living biophysical creator, sustainer in the end. Doesn't matter whether you believe in that reality or not. That is our biophysical creator, sustainer, and end. So it's an eco-theo worldview. Every sustainable culture had what I call an eco-theo culture, meaning that ecology was the heart of their theology. The ecos, the world of ecology was divine, it was sacred, it was more important than them, it was preserved at all cost. And the theo, the world of spirit, spirituality, the gods, all that stuff was infused, embodied, incarnate, revealed, expressed in and through the living world. So here's my eco-theo credo. This is really my nutshell, my sort of creed in a nutshell, or my worldview in a nutshell. And this will be fleshed out throughout this program. Reality is my God. Evidence is my scripture. The epic of evolution is my creation story. Ecology is my theology. Integrity is my spiritual path. And what I mean by integrity are the practices and exercises that help me live in right relationship to reality. So reality is my God, evidence is my scripture, the epic of evolution is my creation story, ecology is my theology, integrity is my spiritual path. And post-doom, no gloom, love, and action is my message. As Penny mentioned, I've spoken over the last 20 years to some 3,000 groups that break into very different populations, Christians of all kinds, Unitarian Universalists in the United Nations and colleges and universities, and those groups that have a this world orientation, as well as New Thought, New Age, integral, Eastern groups, and so forth. And the thing is, whenever I speak to diverse groups where there's a lot of different people from different backgrounds and traditions, and I know that's true within the creation spirituality thing, I always like this cartoon because it really helps us shift from human-centeredness or anthropocentrism to life-centeredness or eco-centrism. Muslims, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, atheists, they all taste like chicken. So just in September of 2022, after nearly 19 years of traveling North America, living in other people's second homes and vacation homes, Connie and I settled here in Ypsilanti, Michigan, so that we could live close to our, well, this is a picture of her when she was 6 months old, our granddaughter. And the thing about, babies, they grow up, and so that, once you teach them to walk, pretty soon it's really appropriate to start teaching them the essentials of being adaptable. So here, such as, rewiring houses and building and repairing houses. Here we are at Home Depot. So you can't get them started on resilience skills too early, in my opinion. So as Penny mentioned, the main website that I've been working with in the last 3 years is Post-Doom. And I've had 85 regenerative conversations exploring overshoot, grief, grounding, and gratitude. It's postdoom.com. And I want to cover very briefly the definitions of doom and post-doom that actually appear on both of these pages on this website. So doom, and I actually worked with, probably 20 different scholars and environmentalists and activists and whatever around the world for almost 8 months on these definitions. So I've got 3 definitions of doom and 3 definitions of post-doom. And I'm always open to them and being improved. So if you have any suggestions for improvement, please offer them to me in the chat. Doom, a normal feeling of disgust or dread upon realizing that technological progress and economic growth and development are the root of our predicament, not our way out. Doom is a name for the anxiety and fear called forth when living in a corrupt, dysfunctional civilization, causing a mass extinction. And doom is the midpoint between denial and regeneration, with or without us. And that's what life does, it regenerates. Many people avoid feeling doom because they think it's the end point. They don't know it's the midpoint between denial and regeneration. I call it compost theology. That's what life does. Resurrection isn't merely about what one God-man 2,000 years ago. It's about the nature of reality at all scales of the universe. Post-doom. What opens up when we remember who we are and how we got here, accept the inevitable, honor our grief, and prioritize what is pro-future and soul-nourishing? Post-doom is a fierce and fearless reverence for life and expansive gratitude, even in the midst of abrupt climate mayhem and the runaway collapse of societal harmony, the health of the biosphere, and business as usual. And post-doom is living meaningfully, compassionately, and courageously, no matter what. And that first one, what opens up when we remember who we are and how we got here, that's what Connie and I spent 19 years doing, is popularizing the great story or epic of evolution or big history, or the universe story. This is our main great story website. So I want to mention this at the start because it's vital to understand the essential nature of denial in human psychology. Denial gets a bad rap, and it really shouldn't. Denial is the largely unconscious habit of thought whereby we refuse to accept the reality of things that are bad or upsetting, or that challenge our worldview, our legacy, how we live, what is required of us, and or our feelings of self-worth or superiority. Denial is also the instinctual impulse to reject or discount information that calls into question our hopes, assumptions, or expectations about the future. I have denial instincts, you have denial instincts, everybody that we know and love has denial instincts, and so we can have compassion for ourselves and each other rather than judging each other for that. In fact, it's often adaptive inattention. Stephen Jenkinson famously said, inattention, that is not paying attention to the world's ecological state, is well advised because attention to it mitigates against your happiness, your contentment, and your sense of well-being. Having a conscience now is a grief-soaked proposition. Whatever spiritual awakening may have meant in past times and places, if you awaken in our time, you awaken with a sob. So I've organized my talk today around 6 repulsive truths that most people don't know. And these, I suggest, are essential for not going crazy in the otherwise crazy-making times. And the first one is that human-centered civilizations destroy their habitat and then self-destruct. All human-centered civilizations. We have no examples to the contrary, and we have over 100 examples of human-centered civilizations that destroy their habitat and then self-destruct. In fact, the stability of the biosphere has been in decline for centuries and an unstoppable collapse for decades. This great acceleration of technology and market-driven ecocide is an easily verifiable fact. The scientific evidence is overwhelming. Evidence is also compelling that the vast majority of people will deny this, especially those still benefiting from the existing order, those legitimately concerned about the consequences of collapse, and those who fear that accepting reality means giving up. The history of more than 80 previous boom and bust, progress, regress, rise and fall societies clearly reveals how and why Homo colossus is destined for near-term extinction. Homo colossus is William Catton, who wrote a book called Overshoot, which is the most important book I've ever read in my life. His definition of industrial humanity is Homo colossus, where each of us uses 30 to 50 times the resources and exudes 30 to 50 times the waste of Homo sapiens. Paradoxically, collapse acceptance and collapse trust may be the only thing that can help us not make a bad situation catastrophically worse, as well as to help us live fully, fearlessly, and meaningfully, even at the end of the world as we know it. So it turns out that collapse is a feature of all human-centered civilizations. And again, most of us don't know this. We didn't learn this in our churches or our synagogues. We didn't learn this in school. We didn't learn this in our families. How would we know this? In fact, the BBC a few years ago did a deep civilization series. They had an article by Luke Kemp called "Are We on the Road to Civilizational Collapse?" And of course he answered yes. And he has this chart of 88 ancient civilizations just between 3000 before the Common Era and 1000 of the Common Era, just that 4,000 year period. Turns out if you go back before 3000 BCE, or if you look at the last 1,000 years, it's well over 100. And as the famous 20th century historian Arnold Toynbee said, great civilizations are not murdered. They take their own lives, and we actually know how. Here's how human-centered civilizations consistently, habitually, almost inevitably commit suicide or ecocide. And it's important to remember, this is just the last 5% of human history, the last 8,000 years, the last 400 generations. Over 80 examples. Roughly, it takes between 225 and 325 years. There's a period of progress, rise, boom. Overshooting the carrying capacity is actually this entire process where we take more from the living world and we exude more waste than the system can bear, and it slowly starts breaking down. And then when we actually go into full overshoot, there's regress or fall or bust. And this is an unstoppable process of collapse. There's never been a civilization in human history, not one, that has ever been able to stop or arrest or even slow down the process of collapse. It's unstoppable, and it actually speeds up. But when you think about it from our inner world, our feelings, our expectations, if you're born and you die in times of expansion, in times of progress, things are getting better and better. So you just know that your kids and grandkids are going to have it better than you, wealthier, longer lives, etc. It's just part of the nature of things. And if you're born and die in times of regress, in times of fall, in times of collapse, well, of course your kids and grandkids are going to have it worse than you. I mean, that's just the nature of the reality you're living in. It's when you're born in times of expansion and it shifts in your lifetime, that's what we call suffering, until you accept it. Only when you truly accept that that's the nature of reality and it's unstoppable can you live in a place that's known as hope-free. It's not hopeful or hopeless, it's hope-free, and it only comes with acceptance. That's why I say post-doom. Unfortunately, you can't get to post-doom without going through doom. If you've never experienced the, oh God, we're so screwed, you're probably not in post-doom yet. You're still in denial of one sort or another. So as I mentioned, this is the most important book I've ever read in my life by far. Many people consider that. Derek Jensen and Paul Ehrlich both consider it the most important book of the 20th century. It probably is. It's certainly the most important book that Connie and I have ever read. And here's a quote from William Catton. It was written in 1980. Today, humanity is locked into stealing ravenously from the future. That is what this book is about. A major aim is to show that commonly proposed solutions for problems confronting us are actually going to aggravate those problems. In order to truly understand our predicament and not make things worse, we need a clear-headed ecological interpretation of history. And that's the key piece. And that's what we're not taught. Most people do not know that. That's what my life is devoted to doing this now. So what's the second repulsive truth that most people don't know? Is that technology in the market can't save us from the ecocide that they always create. Joseph Tainter's famous book, The Collapse of Complex Societies, details in exquisite detail how complex societies add more technology and add more complexity until there's a point of diminishing returns, until the addition of more complexity and more technology actually makes things worse, and then the society collapses. And then this amazing book that has dozens and dozens, kind of a who's who of everybody in this movement has endorsed this book, Technofix, Why Technology Won't Save Us or the Environment. Here are some of the main points that's made in this book. Human technology that doesn't integrate with life's technology, nature's technology, does more harm than good. It just does it over time. Technology in the context of ongoing economic growth does not promote sustainability, but hastens collapse. Most technological solutions to social and technology-created problems are counterproductive. And this book shows why new technologies tend to be uncritically accepted, who really controls the direction of change, and why technology expands and accelerates ecocide. Again, I understand these are unacceptable. These are repulsive. I notice within yourself, you're going to want to deny these. I guarantee it. Number 3, climate change is not our fundamental problem. Ecological overshoot is. Richard Heinberg famously said, our fundamental problem is not climate change, it is overshoot, of which global warming is a symptom. Here's what we activists tend to focus on: climate mayhem, the death of the oceans, plant and animal annihilation, topsoil poisoning and loss, critical resource depletion, chemical and nuclear wastes, the growing gulf between the rich and the poor, economic instability and insanity, political polarization and conflict, the contracting of in-groups, rise of totalitarianism and other isms. All of these are symptoms. They're not the cause. They are symptoms of ecological overshoot of carrying capacity. Again, carrying capacity is there's a limit to how much we can take from the living world and how much we can exude in terms of waste to the living world before the systems break out. In theological language, I call it grace limits. There's a limit. I think that's what the story of the fall of Adam and Eve is about, is our dishonoring of the grace limits of primary reality. And ecological overshoot is primarily caused by how we define and measure wealth, well-being, and success. If we define and measure wealth, well-being, and success in human-centered terms, how wealthy kings or emperors or cities or corporations or whatever, these are human-centered measures. GDP, these are insane. These are ecocidal measures of wealth versus life-centered measures. How well is the soil doing decade by decade? How well are the forests doing decade by decade? How well are the other species doing decade by decade? That's the only sane measure of wealth and well-being. And these are already in extinction level runaway mode: climate mayhem, the death of the oceans, and plant and animal annihilation. Here's another chart along these lines: overshoot of planetary boundaries. Even if we could somehow miraculously, solve the climate crisis, which we can, there are a half a dozen other planetary boundaries that we have already overshot, that are, many of them, extinction level, at least functional extinction. So hopium, a definition of hopium. Hopium is a comforting vision of the future that requires breaking the laws of physics, biology, or ecology. Hopium is addiction to false, literally impossible hopes. And hopium is irrational or unwarranted optimism that promises short-term relief, but delivers crushing disappointment and despair when reality inevitably bites. Here are some examples. Believing that enough people can become climate aware in time to transform society and save Homo colossus. Believing that there's still plenty of time to figure out how to safely, permanently store spent nuclear fuel rods. Believing that human cleverness, technology, or the market can halt the ecocide they always inevitably create. Believing that we can stop or reverse abrupt climate mayhem. Abrupt climate mayhem is like 10,000 years of climate change in half a human lifetime. That's abrupt climate change. Believing that we can stop or reverse abrupt climate mayhem or biospheric and societal collapse. And believing that things can or will return to normal, unaware that normal is precisely why we are so, So here are climate solutions. There are many people that say, don't give me problems, be a solutionary. What are the climate fixes? How can we solve this? Well, that's hopium, that's serious hopium. So here are some climate solutions that actually make things much worse. Renewables, nuclear, wind and solar, fusion, space colonization, carbon taxation or carbon credits, carbon sequestration, green economy, electric cars, super batteries, biofuels. And the reason these make things much worse is because they all exacerbate and extend ecological overshoot. And again, I realize these are repulsive. You want to reject these. You probably are. You're hearing me talk. Accept that. Be okay with that. I'm okay with it. So I do a program called Hopium Detox and Recovery, Accepting and Trusting Unstoppable Collapse, because there is no peace of mind and heart. There is no joy that passes understanding in today's world if you're taking secret hits on the hopium pipe. So what's the fourth repulsive, unacceptable truth that most people don't know? We are decades into abrupt climate mayhem, unstoppable collapse, and a mass extinction that will likely include most insects, fish, mammals, and humans. It turns out that no matter how massive and effective is nonviolent civil disobedience, no matter who or which party is elected into or voted out of public office, no matter how many people change their habits, become vegan, stop flying, whatever, no matter how many so-called game-changing artificial intelligence-driven high-tech solutions are tried, no matter how many sociopathic CEOs, bankers, and politicians are imprisoned, no matter how aggressively we try to shift to renewables or get to net zero emissions, no matter how much evolution of consciousness occurs in the next decade or two, and no matter how many accords, what is pledged or agreed to, or what laws are enacted. And I want to especially look at that last one because we've got a lot of evidence on this. We're already 2 to 3 decades into abrupt runaway and exponentially accelerating climate mayhem, meaning it's getting faster and faster and it's out of our control. And here's the evidence. Here's a chart of all of the COPs, see COP 1, 2, 3, all the, the conference of the parties, all these COPs, right? And it's actually rising exponentially. Our summits, agreements, promises, and pledges are worse than meaningless. And the reason that they're worse than meaningless is because they give us the illusion that we're making progress. So we don't do the things that we have to do to not be evil on a geological timescale, like assist trees in migrating and assist other species, like capping the nukes and preventing having as few nuclear meltdowns as possible. So during the 1960s, carbon parts per million were rising roughly at 0.9 parts per million per year. In the 1970s, it was 1.3 parts per million per year. In the 1980s and 90s, it was 1.5 parts per million per year. In the 2000s, it was 2.0 parts per million per year. In the 2010s, it was 2.4, and it's already now 2.5, and I believe this year is probably going to be 2.6 parts per million per year. And that's just the CO2. That's just the carbon dioxide. When you factor in methane and nitrous oxide, it's much worse. For example, see this chart? This goes back to 800,000 years. This is the ice core data, right? So the ice core is before 1958. Mauna Loa in Hawaii is the data after 1958. In May of 2022, we were at 422 parts per million. Here are the peak glacials when the glaciers were thickest and furthest south, right? 180 parts per million was the average. The Ice Age average was 200 parts per million. Pre-industrial, that's where agriculture is ideal, 280 parts per million. Agriculture and civilizational collapse really begins to become unstoppable at about 360. That's why there's organizations like 350.org, which is trying to find ways to get down to 350. Of course, now we know there's no way to do that, but a lot of people don't know that yet. And the climate stability needed for agriculture and civilizations is this range between 280 and 350 parts per million. That's what's needed for agriculture and civilizations. That's what allowed for complex civilizations and the stability of the Holocene. So we had the jet stream was stable. We had stable enough climate. So we talk about climate change, but it's actually abrupt, runaway, and irreversible. And again, this is just carbon. When we look at nitrous oxide and methane added to it, we're above 500 parts per million. This is where we are. And this chart here is very clear. CO2 concentration, global temperature, and sea level rise. Turns out, again, this is over 450,000 years. They rise and fall in lockstep. Turns out sometimes one of them leads, sometimes another one leads, but they all rise and fall in lockstep. And here's where we are now in terms of over 500 parts per million in terms of CO2 equivalent, which includes nitrous oxide and methane. So it's not going to be long before global temperature and sea level rise rises precipitously. So we are in unstoppable. In the same way that we've all seen images of the World Trade Towers. Anybody that would try to argue that you could stop the collapse of the World Trade Towers is insane. Well, turns out civilizational collapse and biosphere collapse are just as unstoppable. They just do it in slow motion in comparison. So no matter what, these extinction level tipping points are already in a rearview mirror. It's not that we're at risk of passing these. It's not that we have to be careful about passing these. These are already, we ran that dog over 10 or 20 years ago. The loss of the world's ice. It's inevitable that the ice of the Arctic, Greenland, West Antarctica, ultimately East Antarctica too. Mountain glaciers, we're losing it. And these books, if you only read one book on climate change, read Dard Jamel's The End of Ice, Bearing Witness and Finding Meaning in the Path of Climate Disruption. Peter Wadhams, one of the top scientists in the world, also wrote a book called The Farewell to Ice. This is the painful
Michael,
truth.
Michael?
Yes.
There's some rustling related to your microphone.
Oh, okay. Let me, okay. So let me try now. Say something so I can make sure I hear you.
It sounds better.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. So when most of the Arctic sea ice is gone, the serious global warming begins. And this, you can Google phase change and latent heat. Methane, we're already in runaway mode. The permafrost, the massive methane release from the permafrost, the hydrates, the clathrates, that is the shallow seas, the deeper seas, as well as gas and oil wells. Now we could potentially, there's millions of gas and oil wells that are leaking methane. We could potentially help stop some of that. But the others, the wetlands, these are unstoppable. Ocean acidification, ocean deoxygenation, that is the loss of oxygen, and at least 25 feet, 25 to 40 feet of abrupt, nonlinear, that is, in fits and spurts, non-linear sea level rise is already baked in. If every human being went extinct tonight, we'd still see between 25 and 40 feet of sea level rise in the next 150 years. The great conflagration, that is the great burning of the world's forests, it's already out of control. See, this is the thing. Emphasis is on reducing emissions. We can't reduce, we could potentially, if there was some miracle of political will, we could potentially reduce human-made emissions, but it turns out if every human being died tonight, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide would continue to rise every single year because the forests of the world and the methane is being released. Again, it's unstoppable. The loss of most species of animals and plants on land and in lakes, rivers, and oceans. And increasingly severe and deadly weather. Bigger storms, more intense storms, bigger floods, droughts, hurricanes, and so forth. This is now unstoppable. There's nothing we can do to slow, stop, or reverse this. So I get, this is repulsive. This is unacceptable. None of us can accept this without a lot of difficulty. The sixth repulsive truth that most people don't know is believing that we can slow, stop, or reverse biosphere and societal collapse. But believing that leads good people to become dangerous and great people to endorse great evil. Thomas Berry was the one that said good people are dangerous when they have a worldview that is out of alignment with the nature of reality. If we believe that civilization can be saved, if we believe that technology in the market, it turns out that every market economy, every economy in the history of the world that treated the living world as resources and a place for our waste, every market economy that basically had the understanding that the land belongs to us, rather than the indigenous understanding we belong to the land, that's life-centeredness. Every market economy, every money-based economy destroys itself. It has to. But if we don't understand that, we're going to not do the things that we need to do, like helping other tree species and helping other animal species and capping the nukes and ensuring as few nuclear meltdowns and that sort of thing as possible. And collapse increases the likelihood, really the inevitability of scores of nuclear meltdowns. So I mentioned before hopium. I want to come back to this. Who is most vulnerable for hopium? Well, young people who expect a life like their parents and grandparents had, totally understandable. High schoolers agonizing about whether college and college debt is worth it. Couples trying to decide on marriage or whether to become parents. Parents of young children and teenagers still living at home. And older generations who are terrified or consumed with guilt when considering the world that their adult children and grandchildren will inherit. Those are concrete, those are specific. Here are some more abstract ones. Any and all who lack an ecological understanding of history. Those who are unwilling or unable to trust reality as it really is, not as we wish it was.
and of course, devout believers in the secular religion of eternal, everlasting human progress. Turns out that the single greatest destroyer of the living world is progress, the notion of everlasting progress. I mean, think about it. Defining progress in a way that's leading to ecocide, like, that's crazy. Defining and measuring progress in short-term, human-centered, that is anti-future ways, leads good people to unknowingly cheerlead great evil. William Catton and Thomas Berry, my two most significant male mentors, talk about the delusion of human-centered progress. Catton writes, human society is inextricably part of a global biotic community. And in that community, human dominance has had and is having self-destructive consequences. Thomas Berry, along similar lines, said the most difficult transition to make is from a human-centered to a life-centered norm of progress. If there's to be any true progress, the entire life community must progress. Any so-called progress of the human at the expense of the larger life community must ultimately lead to a diminishment of human life itself. So banking on technofix or political solutions, so-called, will lead to catastrophic nuclear meltdowns and incalculable extinctions. There's going to be lots of extinctions anyway, but there's going to be an unnecessary number if we bank on technofix or political solutions. Problems caused by economic growth and development will not be solved by more of the same. Indeed, our predicament will worsen. And understanding ecology, energy, and history undermines expectations that human ingenuity, technology, or the market can save industrial civilization. It turns out that human ingenuity, technology, and the market are what got us into this mess in the first place. So the number one, I realize this is a radical claim I'm making, but the number one cause of climate anxiety, environmental dread, and doomed to fail anti-future policies is hopium. Hopium addiction sabotages our ability to think, feel, and live in right relationship to God, in right relationship to reality, in right relationship to nature. Without an ecological understanding of history and human nature, people invariably have distorted views of what's possible. Hopium thus leads good people to set their sights on what will ultimately lead to geological scale evil. And young activists are especially prone to hopium fantasies, which is why so many high-profile boomer peddlers exist in the world. Now, hopium leading to geological scale evil, like what am I talking about? Well, there are 440 nuclear reactors worldwide, requiring us to assume that industrial civilization has everlasting life. Yet we are already 25 to 30 years into abrupt runaway climate change. So here's the 64 million year question, not $64 million question for those of you who are familiar with that, but the 64 million year question. As industrial civilization continues to collapse faster and faster, how many Chernobyl or Fukushima-like or worse meltdowns due to wildfires, hurricanes, droughts, tsunamis, power grid failures, political instability, or terrorism do you think are possible, likely, inevitable? This is what I mean when young activists are especially prone to hopium fantasies. This is the New York Times, just in March. Okay, doomer, and the climate advocates who say it's not too late. The growing chorus of young people is focusing on climate solutions. It's too late means I don't have to do anything and the responsibility is off me. Alania Wood, a sustainability scientist in Tennessee who takes to TikTok to communicate much of her climate messaging. She says the science is bad, but it's only going to get worse the longer it takes to act. Now, what I want to focus on is these two phrases. It's not too late, and the longer it takes to act. Well, the truth of the matter is it's way too late for some things, and it's not at all too late for other things. And if we don't make that distinction, then we're just going to confuse the issue. And as William Catton makes the point, if we lack an ecological understanding of human history, then our actions, this whole idea, we need to act, but our actions are actually going to make things worse if we're simply expanding and accelerating Overshoot. Here's another one. Climate optimism in the New York Times. We have reasons for hope on climate change. Stopping climate change is doable, but time is short, United Nations panel warns. Why our hope for the planet is not yet extinct. In fact, Margaret writes this. She says, an internal dialectic between hope and despair governs my days. The more necessary it becomes to create a hopeful future, the harder it is for me to imagine one. And here's the paradox, that believing this kind of stuff will cause dozens of nuclear meltdowns and millions, maybe billions of people unnecessarily being in despair and depression. Two more. Actually, humanity can still avoid climate catastrophe. And this one, it's now over 6 million views. We will fix climate change. Here's the fact that none of us, this is repulsive, none of us, but these are 4 metaphors that will help us understand the nature of these repulsive facts. Industrial civilization is a demon devouring the living world and creating hell on earth. Those who advocate for so-called renewables, clean energy, or a Green New Deal are actually proposing strategies to keep the demon on life support. Another analogy or metaphor, industrial civilization is a dead man walking. Homo colossus, man, is like a Chernobyl worker exposed to lethal radiation, and nothing can stop the cascading failure of his organs and certain death. And I use the word man because that's a personification of humanity, whereas humankind is. Third accurate metaphor, Homo colossus, that is industrial humanity, has stage 4 lung cancer. Arguing for green technology or an energy transition is like believing that organic cigarettes can restore to health and win the fight against death. And then finally, the last metaphor I want to offer is the global economy is a parasitic superorganism. This parasitic superorganism is now entering its death throes because it has exhausted its host, Earth, and its own financial creativity such that it cannot continue growing, which is a prerequisite for its survival. One of the most pervasive things we find, and many of us as activists may find ourselves here, so I don't mean to step on any toes here, but the ecocidal hubris of the almighty we. It's a sort of secular religious faith in omnipotent human agency, progress and development, biosphere management, climate restoration, which is really another way of saying geoengineering, global scale mobilization, species level awakening, the evolution of consciousness. This is why so many climate books, 90% of the book is awesome in terms of what it shows. And then there's always the happy chapter. If we just do this, or if we just vote this way, or if we just all come together. In fact, I love this cartoon. It's not too late to stop the worst of climate change if we all accept reality and work together for the common good. And the key words are, if we all. That's the hubris of the almighty we. We're screwed. So post-doom, let me just wind this down. Post-doom, no gloom, joy is nearly impossible without a God-centered, that is life-centered, ecocentric, ecological and historical understanding of 3 things. Which actions help and which ones harm? That is, which actions reduce ecological overshoot and which exacerbate or extend ecological overshoot. What is truly out of our control and what we can still potentially start, stop, shift, change, or transform. And just because we can't save everything doesn't mean there's not a tremendous amount of good work that we can still do. And then getting clear, which is difficult to do in light of a multi-billion-dollar greenwash propaganda campaign, getting clear about this distinction, what it is not too late for versus what it is too late for. So here's some things I can say confidently. It's not too late for these. It's not too late to do anything and everything we can to promote and encourage ecological integrity. This includes all of the things related to permaculture and sustainability and regeneration and agroecology. It's not too late for any of that. It's not too late to do anything and everything we can to promote social coherence, human beings getting along better. And it's not too late to anything and everything we can do to promote personal wholeness. Turns out those 3 things, ecological integrity, social coherence, and personal wholeness, is what every society has always had to provide. It's not too late for any of that. It's not too late to reduce suffering and to adapt to what John Michael Greer calls less, L-E-S-S, less energy, less stuff, less stimulation. It's not too late to resist further destruction and evil. It's not too late to assist trees and other plants in migrating. With my wife, Connie, this is her major life work. It's not too late to support indigenous resistance. It turns out where biodiversity is, and the land is being protected most fiercely all over the world, indigenous communities are almost always at the vanguard. It's not too late to support that. It's not too late to engage in all kinds of regenerative love and action. And I prefer the term love and action to activism. Where does love motivate you to be in action? As much activism is still fear-based and judgmental. And then it's not too late to be a blessing to friends, family, and community. I suggest we all invest in all of this. However, it is too late to slow, stop, or reverse abrupt climate mayhem and the accelerating collapse of the biosphere and business as usual. It is too late to prevent the loss of most of the world's forests, ice, insects, coral reefs, and protective ozone layer. It is too late to spare Homo colossus of the ecocidal consequences of human ingenuity, technology, and the market. And it is too late to prevent billions of humans and other mammals and vertebrates from dying this decade or next. Again, I know this is repulsive, this is unacceptable. I want to conclude with these couple quotes. Hope-free, sweet grief, which is grateful, loving sadness that's neither hopeful nor hopeless. Grief requires us to know the time that we're in. The great enemy of grief is hope. Hope is the four-letter word for people who are unwilling to know things for what they are. Our time requires us to be hope-free. Burn through the false choice of being hopeful or hopeless. They are two sides of the same con job. Grief is required to proceed. And then Joanna Macy, the depth of your grief is the measure of your love. You wouldn't be feeling grief if you didn't love. One of my favorite quotes from Joanna Macy, one of my great mentors, from A Wild Love for the World, her latest book. This is a dark time filled with suffering and uncertainty. Like living cells in a larger body, it is natural that we feel the trauma of our world. So don't be afraid of the anguish you feel or the anger or the fear, because these responses arise from the depth of your caring and the truth of your interconnectedness with all beings. So here's what we covered mostly today: the truly unstoppable nature of biospheric and civilizational collapse. That's what I spent the vast majority of this teaching time. These questions, the most relevant aspects of eco-mysticism and the great story, empowering insights of creation, spirituality, and the epic of evolution. How can we stay positive and support each other in staying positive and inspiring, even at Teotihuacan? And then what are the gifts that we can offer our communities, the world, in the future? I hope the rest of our conversation for the rest of today and the vast majority, probably 90% or 85% of the teaching of what I'll be doing next month is on these three here. So let me go off screen share here.
All right.
Questions, feedback. It doesn't have to be a question. You can just share your heart. You can share your feelings.
If I may, before we start, just a procedural note. The way we like to do this here is, if you have a comment or a question for Michael, note the reactions button on your Zoom toolbar. And when you click that, not the pictures on the top, but the line that spells out raise hand. If you do that, then it'll let us know you have something you'd like to say or ask, and we can take you in sequence. And I see we had a hand raised. Go, Mahalia, if you want to go ahead, please.
Yeah. Hi, Mahalia. Yes. I wanted to know, so considering that it's where the planet is going into collapse, the world as we know it, then there's, and I know this may sound bizarre, but why try to stop it if it's going to collapse anyway? And we need to focus on how to best caretake ourselves and the animals and who are here and living through this. Spend our energy on that. What do you think?
I could not agree more. frankly, I think virtually every attempt to slow, stop, or reverse the collapse of the biosphere, the collapse of civilization, is not only fruitless, it's going to drive you crazy. Local action, local love and action can truly make some difference still. I mean, we can reduce a lot of suffering. We can improve the soil of our region. We can restore ecosystems in our region. So there's a lot of good work to be done, but it's in the context that we are living in a larger system, namely industrial humanity, Homo colossus, that's already collapsing, has been collapsing for decades, and it's been collapsing the biosphere for actually a couple hundred years. And that process is unstoppable. And so how do we then choose to be engaged in actions that nurture our hearts, that reduce suffering, and that be a blessing to others? But my advice for what it's worth is just let go of the desire or the drive to transform our larger systems. It's just going to make you crazy.
Thank you. Thank you. That's what I thought.
All right. Carol Kilby, please.
Thank you, Bob. Hi, Michael. And my question is maybe a personal nature. I'm wondering how this kind of teaching wears on you. You've always taught with passion, but this is a different kind of message. And so that's my first question.
Yeah, Carol, that's a great question. And to be really, really honest, the first few years that I was living with this, it was very, very difficult. Some of the slides that I took out, I'll actually have in the next month. But I was passionately involved in activism, picketing. Connie and I supported the Great March for Climate Action. And then at that point, it was very trying and emotionally taxing, and many times in tears. I now, for the last probably 3 or more years, I live almost entirely in a state, and this is going to sound bizarre, and I'm not exaggerating, but I live almost entirely in a state of not just joy, but like, I don't know, any of you have watched some of Brian Swim's videos where he talks about that we are to gawk, that we're the universe gawking at itself. I mean, I live with this sense of amazement and gratitude that I can just yesterday, I went to Kroger's yesterday. I am filled with gratitude that I can still go to the grocery store, that I still have a working refrigerator and a freezer, that I can still put gas in the car. Those things are going away, probably in the not too distant future. So every day that I get to be present to my granddaughter who lives two blocks away, I have a 2-year-old granddaughter who gives so much joy, and I love being in her life. And I'm not afraid for her future. I know she's going to die a much shorter life than I would. She won't live to be 1/3 my age. But I'm going to do everything I can to ensure that she has the best life possible and as much joy and trust, and that she's going to be looking. Because here's the thing, we know a lot about previous collapsed civilizations and really difficult times like war situations. And we know that those individuals that have the most meaning, the most joy, the most gratitude, the most compassion and generosity are those who look for opportunities to be a blessing to others. And so I actually don't experience this as trying at all anymore. I did for several years, but now I'm just grateful to have this work to do. And the news doesn't, the news, as I said before, the propaganda formerly known as the news, doesn't land like a dagger anymore. No matter how, and I'm exposed to like all of the most brutal stuff happening in the world. I mean, the one news place that I go to every single day, he only publishes 5 days or 6 days a week. He doesn't do Sunday, but it's climateandeconomy.com. climateandeconomy.com. He's got like 30 little snippets of global news: Monday, Wednesday, Friday, climate; Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, the economy. And I get a big picture of collapse all over the world every day, but it doesn't hit me like a dagger anymore. I accept that this is inevitable. And it's kind of like when I was diagnosed with cancer 12, 13 years ago. I accepted that I could die in 8 months, which I could have. And once I did that, I lived fearlessly. I lived with just this mesmerized joy of living each day, even though I knew I could die in 8 months. Fortunately, the chemo worked and I'm still alive. But nonetheless, that peace is possible, but it requires acceptance. It requires really not, see, there's collapse awareness. Collapse awareness can be hell. Collapse awareness is the stages of grief. Then there's collapse acceptance. That's where the transformation begins to happen. And collapse trust is where the transformation happens. And one of the latest post-doom conversations I had that I recommend to all of you is Karen Perry. And the title, the whole program, the whole hour-long conversation we had was on the 15 benefits of collapse acceptance. You don't get these benefits if you're still taking a hit on the hopium pipe, if you still believe that we can transform it. But these benefits are absolutely possible with full acceptance and trust.
Thank you so much, and particularly for your conclusion ending in trust. I have another question. I'm just going to put it in the chat box to make room for others, but thank you for your life work.
Thanks, Carol. And I find it difficult to multitask, so I will look at the chat box, and because I have your your phone number and your email, I may just email you my response or call you. Because here's my promise. Any questions that are put into the chat, I will respond to. I may audio record it and then send the link to Penny, and then she can distribute it, whatever, but I will respond to all of your questions. If I don't get a chance to do so live right now, I will do so before next month. I promise I'll do so in the next week.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. Marjorie, yes, I apologize for, I'm not sure why you slipped out of position there for a minute, but go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this. I just found that my anxieties were sort of put into the light, and this underlying thing that tells me to go to bed, curl up, and wait for sure death is changed into not like what I won't use hope anymore, but there is still meaning in changing the way I live, growing my vegetables, because I think things are forcing us to do some of these things because food's so expensive. People are growing on their rooftops. I mean, and so helping the bees, whatever we can do, it doesn't mean that we're trying to save the planet, but we're trying to live fully and say to our grandchildren, nieces, and nephews, I did what I could. I did what I could, not to save the planet, but to change the way we function as a society and change what we do as a society, and to cause less harm as possible. I guess that's what I mean. Is that right?
That's absolutely right, Marjorie.
Okay.
And the thing is, Thomas Berry used to famously say, I drove a car here to tell you how bad cars are. We're all living in a dysfunctional, radically unsustainable civilization. There is no possibility of purity. And so we can just let go of the guilt, and we can let go of the judgment of ourselves and each other. I mean, if you have a grandchild in some distant part of the world and you have been hesitating to fly to see them, just fly. Go visit those grandchildren. By God, whether you fly or not is going to not make any difference whatsoever in what's really already unfolding and unstoppable. I'm not suggesting be irresponsible. What I am suggesting is we can let go of the judgment and guilt of ourselves and the judgment of guilt of others. We're living in a profoundly unsustainable civilization that can't possibly become sustainable. And so we can lighten up and have compassion for ourselves and each other and do what we can. Because we all have to pass the mirror test. We all have to look in the mirror and feel good about ourselves. So, you know, whatever it is that we do, whether it's eating less meat or flying less or driving less or whatever, you know, all those are good. They're not going to save the world, but they're going to help save your soul. They're going to help you look in the mirror and feel good.
Greg, yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Michael, for your prophetic witness and the clarity with which you're really revealing our situation. I don't think anyone has articulated it as clearly as you have, and I'm grateful for that. It's like some people have been saying, I'm feeling tremendous relief, and I don't feel so insane any longer. I guess my question is, I'm very involved in the peace movement, and you know, the disarmament, nuclear disarmament sort of my inspiration has been the Berrigan brothers, Dan and Phil. And I'm just wondering, you know, as you said, you came away from demonstrations in tears, and I often feel this too. Should I continue engaging in these activities?
Of course.
If love, again, I come back to the phrase, first of all, thank you for the question, Greg. Love and action. Each one of us just paying attention to our own heart and nurturing a more intimate personal relationship with God, G, earth emoji, D. In other words, our concept of God, if our concepts of God don't include the biosphere, don't include Gaia, don't include the living world, if we don't treat Earth as God's local living presence and voice, then we're missing out on a huge source of benefit and something that can help us experience reverential joy on a day-by-day basis. So if love in action motivates you to continue to do this peace work, by God, keep doing it. But if you're experiencing burnout, well then, you know, question it or question the amount of time or whatever. Here's the thing that a lot of us liberals and progressives don't understand and really find repulsive, unacceptable, which is that in expanding civilizations, when there's more than enough energy, more than enough resources, the pie is getting bigger and bigger, liberal values predominate effortlessly or almost effortlessly. But in contracting, collapsing civilizations and empires, the pie is getting smaller and smaller, less and less resources, less and less energy, more and more infighting, the in-groups tighten up. And so progressive and liberal values are much more difficult. They can be still worked with and sustained in certain contexts, but it's not easy. It's not effortless. It takes a lot of hard work. So understanding that, again, allows you to, when you face resistance to your peace activism or your justice activism or your environmental activism or whatever, you're not pulling your hair out. It's like, oh yeah, right, of course, of course, of course. I mean, I actually had this worldview back in like 2014. So in 2015, once, you know, within about 3 months of President Trump, or at the time, Donald Trump announcing he was going to run, within a few months, I realized he's going to win. Because this is the nature of collapsing civilizations. And when he won, I wasn't pulling my hair out saying, oh no, this shouldn't be. It was like, yeah, right, of course, of course, of course. This is the kind of breakdown. This is the kind of, John Michael Greer calls it the senility of the elites, where we see the common corruption of the economic world, the common dysfunction of the political world. And so I now, more often than not, when I'm, you know, I don't watch TV. I haven't watched TV in 40 years. I just gave it up because I have an addictive nature. But when I read or become aware of crazy making stuff, I now don't pull out my hair. I reach for the popcorn because I expect that it's inevitable.
Yes. Thank you so much. Peace.
Peace to you, brother.
Martha, hi, go ahead.
Hi, Bob. Thanks. Thank you, Mike. You just articulate so well some of the things I've been thinking for a while, but couldn't have put in those words. My question is, I belong to a group of elders who are very environmentally committed. That's our focus. And how do we get people to hear this about collapse without presenting that very well organized talk that you presented? That is to say, how can a group of people who are very enlightened, I would call them, how can they be persuaded that what you're saying is correct? I can hear the objections right now, and these are people I have great respect for, work well with, but whom I profoundly differ from in terms of this whole attitude towards collapse. I can hear the, you know, objections to the you're too pessimistic. We can't keep going with our work unless we believe it's going to have some kind of success, etc. You know all the arguments. How do we get them to start to hear this?
First of all, thank you for the question, Martha. My first response is don't try to. Just love them. Just love them exactly as they are and exactly as they're not. Do look for opportunities to plant little seeds. Like, for example, most of the videos that I've created on the postdoom.com website, the resource page has just tremendous numbers, almost an overwhelming amount of. You could watch 1 or 2 of those videos a week and just see which ones you might that might be effective. But on the discussion page of the Postdoom website are the 3 or 4 most pastoral or supportive, or where I'm trying to take somebody by the hand and gently open them up to this kind of perspective. And one of the things that I've created those videos for is precisely so you don't have to try to do what I'm doing. Let me do it. But one way of doing is you could say something, I'm in a discussion and, we watch this video and we discuss it. And, it may not be your cup of tea. It may be too scary for you. But if you do watch it, love to discuss it with you. That kind of non-attached, non-pushy, like whether they accept collapse or not, you just trust their timing, because they have their own relationships. Somebody who with kids or grandkids that are living close, and there's just a zillion reasons why people cannot emotionally accept this yet. And they think that we need to stay optimistic and we need to stay hopeful, which of course just guarantees greater suffering down the road. As Oswald Spengler, one of the great historians of the 20th century, said, optimism in declining civilizations is cowardice, because it's out of touch with reality and it always guarantees more suffering. But that's where a lot of people are at. So again, having compassion for people, knowing that denial is a healthy instinct and that we all have it, and that your friends are going to resist this kind of stuff. So just love them exactly as they are, exactly as they're not. When there are opportunities to say, wow, I just watched this video. It may not be your cup of tea. It may be, not anything you're interested in, but if you ever are, let's talk about it. That kind of non-attached approach is the one that I found most effective.
Thank you. That's useful.
Peggy, yes, go ahead.
Alrighty, thank you so very much. This is my initial introduction to post-doom and etc. What interests me that I hadn't heard before was the nuclear meltdowns throughout the world. Do you see that as being caused by the huge shift in the weather, the floods, the earthquakes, etc.?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, here's the thing. I mentioned that one of the primary causes of ecocide is progress, the belief in eternal progress or everlasting progress. But I could also have said the hubris of technological progress, that I love the ancient Greek definition of hubris, the overweening pride of the doomed. And nuclear energy, nuclear weapons are the height of technological hubris. And I don't honestly know whether it's possible. I think it's probably not possible to have at least several to a half a dozen or more nuclear meltdowns based on tsunamis and power grid failures and hurricanes and what have you. But whether we have 6 nuclear meltdowns in the next 20 or 30 years, assuming humans are around that long, or whether we have 200 nuclear meltdowns, that's a big difference. And that's why accepting collapse, that it's not about whether collapse is coming or not, we're decades into collapse already. Accepting that then allows us to say, okay, things are going to get worse. There are going to be power outages. There are going to be more tsunamis. There are going to be droughts. And there are some places where the power plants, the nuclear power plants, are on rivers where the projection is within the next 8 to 12 years, the rivers are going to be too warm. They can't cool the power plants.
Oh.
So there's lots of reasons to begin shutting down the power plants, but more importantly than that, getting the spent fuel rods out of the swimming pools, out of these temporary places, and into someplace permanent like Yucca Mountain. Now, that requires political will. Somebody could arguably say, Michael, isn't that the hubris of the almighty we, thinking that we can do that? Maybe that's true. but surely it's kind of like, being a peace activist, working to do something to try to prevent or to try to limit as much large, millions of years toxicity as possible seems to me to be a good thing, even if it's, largely futile.
Thank you.
Kenneth, yes, go ahead.
Ken?
Kenneth, yes. You need to mute yourself, yeah? You're muted, Ken. Kenneth, you're muted.
Thank you. Hey, Michael, how are you?
Good, brother, good.
Two things. One, I've come upon a British method for grieving called emotional logic. And it uses the terms that were commonly used in our grief work, but defines them differently. And I'm just barely through it. I've got a lot more work to do, but you might want to give that a look in terms of how useful it can be applied to the kind of grief of climate that we're talking about here in order to keep us from going totally nuts around the bend.
I definitely will. Thank you for that recommendation.
The other thing is I spend about one morning a week with a guy who has 820 acres of forest land that he is working to preserve against wildfires. In Northern California here, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I can do is just invite one of the folks who's struggling with some of these climate realities to spend that morning with me up in the woods.
Yes, exactly.
They will have done 3 hours, 4 hours of work, which will be probably a good emotional regulation thing anyway, plus make a contribution to the ongoing survivability of that patch of land and investing in things that we are not going to see, which I think is another part of the ethics here. We're making amends for the way we have lived, and the things we might do that would decrease suffering or lessen the collapse are probably not going to benefit us, but species yet to come. The argument is that going to be the crows that will now be the dominant species, or some other smart aleck creature? Anyway, that's all I have to say.
No, thank you, Kenneth. Anything that we can do to invite anybody, even people who are fully collapse denying or climate denying or whatever, anything that we can do to help them nurture a more intimate personal relationship with the living world is holy work, in my opinion. I'll definitely check out the emotional logic.
Great, thank you. Marilyn, you'll have to unmute yourself, please.
Hi, I'm sorry I was eating. I just wanted to say you made me feel so much better about my current situation and my recent decisions, Michael. I live in a walkable city. I no longer own a car. I don't use air conditioning because I moved to a place that has beautiful weather year round. Everybody can't do that, I understand, but at least you made me feel better about myself. I'm just curious, that's got nothing to do with my question. My question is, do you have a perspective on or a viewpoint on what's causing this increase in youth suicides? Is it a sense of hopelessness? Is that taking over our youth? The sense of hopelessness as they look to the future? Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Marilyn. So one of the things that I learned in the last 9 years of studying the rise and fall of unsustainable human-centered civilizations, which need to be contrasted from genuinely sustainable, indigenous, ecocentric, or life-centered societies. Totally different. The only true form of sustainability is preserving the systems that provide you and your society with everything it needs to survive and thrive, preserving those systems with religious zeal. So the soil, the forest, the water, the life, the other species, all of that thing, to preserve that with religious passion. That's the only thing that's sustainable. And it really was the role of religion or lifeways in indigenous cultures to do that, to basically insist upon pain of death or ostracizing, that the future will not be compromised by the present. It's accountability to the future. And so in unsustainable civilizations, on the rise up, when things are getting better and better for at least the elite, I mean, obviously not the slaves, but for at least the ruling class and the elite, and sometimes in the middle class, like in our situation, things are getting better. But then on the way down, we do see over and over and over again throughout history, what we would today call depression, anxiety, suicide, despair. And it really is unstoppable. That doesn't mean that we can't make a difference where we can, of course, but it means that young people feel that with greater, and part of it is none of them learn this kind of stuff that I'm talking about. I mean, my last sermon, the only sermon that I've done in the last 2.5 years that actually in a building, in a church building, I delivered just 2 weeks ago up in Flint, Michigan. And the title of it was, and it's on the Post-Doom resources, or it's the Post-Doom website, the discussion page. It's the top video on the discussion page of the Post-Doom website. But the title of it is The Big Picture: What Every Young Person and Grandparent Should Know. And it's just the basic understanding, and the positive response really kind of blew me away. I mean, there was one woman who was just in tears. She was the lead activist of the congregation and all. And so back to your question, yes, young people are especially feeling the anguish, the fear, the anger. Oftentimes, if you don't have a historic understanding, it's so easy to blame and judge. You'll see the way I started that sermon is kind of reverse psychology. I said, here are 5 ways to guarantee your misery and that you spread the misery around. And so I used sort of reverse psychology, and it was playful, but it was really potent. So definitely check that sermon out, The Big Picture, What Every Young Person and Grandparent Should Know. But yes, I think anything that we can do to, one other thing, grief is important for those of us in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. But grief is the last thing that somebody, a child or a teenager, they're not feeling grief, they're feeling the death of dreams. And in my opinion, the most that we can do to encourage young people to have as much love and trust and joy and fascination, we should not toxify them with our fears and our judgments. That's why virtually all of my programs are designed to help people get to 3 places: clarity rather than confusion. So clarity replacing confusion. And I'll cover this in much more depth next month. Compassion rather than blame, because when you really understand this historical ecological perspective, it's like the blame just evaporates and you start finding yourself having compassion for those that just last week you blamed and judged. And then courageous love and action rather than desperate activism. So yes, young people are especially feeling the despair.
Thank you, Michael. Damien, please, you'll have to unmute yourself, please.
Thank you, Michael, for your very realistic and sobering presentation. One of the societal changes that I've noticed spiritually, and you probably have too, that's probably related to civilization and ecological collapse, is the rise in spiritual channelers and mediums that are channeling, they call them spirit guides and angels. And there's a recognition that humanity is going through a spiritual shift of the dark night of the soul, the dark night of humanity. But they seem to have some sort of spiritual message from the other side that is also hopeful. Have you noticed that trend of the increase in channelers and mediums? Because I see it all over the place. I don't. And I get announcements on websites, and a lot of them do have websites, and you can You can pick your favorite channelers, but they're not, a lot of them seem to be very genuine and spiritual. And I know there's a stigma about channeling and mediums and psychics, but there seems to be a growth in genuine ones from the spiritual dimension. Have you noticed that increase, Michael?
Yes, and again, that's one of the things that can be expected. As civilizations collapse, as empires collapse, more and more people are trying to find meaning. They're
Yes.
trying to find sources of comfort and inspiration. And the whole realm, I do a whole thing on day language and night language and day and night experience. And night experience is the experience of our dreams, and we fly in our dreams, and we're not having a miraculous experience. It's what's happening in the dream state. And so, yes, there are a number, and there will continue to be people coming from a whole wide variety of spiritual and mystical and religious traditions that can help provide comfort and inspiration and joy and whatever. And there are many ways to interpret that. So you can interpret it literally, which I don't happen to interpret literally at all. I interpret it as night language, as this realm of the inner world of our hearts and our imaginations and our spirits. But yes, I've noticed that it's inevitable. I celebrate it, even though sometimes if it's too human-centered, it can take us down a direction that's just going to cause us to more suffer. It has to be life-centered, not human-centered, in my experience, to really bear what I would call the fruit of the spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, compassion, generosity, and so forth.
Yes, some of them even speak about Gaia, not just spirit guides, but that Earth has a consciousness, Earth has a spirit, and that so some of them are very life-centered in a way from that spiritual dimension.
Yeah, I'm a part of a Gaian group of academics and others that are deeply committed to a Gaian worldview. And just so you know, I'll put it into the chat, but just literally last night, myself, my wife, Connie, and a friend and colleague, Deirdre, just started an 8-week series. It's not every week, it's actually every 10 days. So last night was Wednesday night. Next Saturday, 10 days from last night, is the next session. And then the following, Wednesday and a half past that. So every 10 days between now and the spring equinox, we have a session, and it's on death, dying, and sacred endings. And it's free, it's just Zoom, but definitely on the postdoom.com website, if you click on discussion, you'll see the schedule. And I also put up, this morning, I put up the video of last night's session. So you can see that if you're interested. But I definitely, if you're interested in the whole realm of deep meaning and not only not being afraid of our mortality, but embracing the sacred side of death, of impermanence. Connie and I, those of you that have known us for any length of time, know that we did programs for a decade and a half on sort of a sacred science, meaningful approach to death. And so at any rate, check that out. It's again, the postdoom.com website, the discussion page, you'll see the schedule for the 8-session series on death, dying, and sacred.
Very good. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Dave.
Well, we're at our usual ending time. It's been a wonderful time together. I don't know if is your question. We have one last question. Is it quick? Can we hit the highlights if they're your last question?
Go for it, Jay.
I can't see her name.
Hi, Jean Ann.
Jean
Ann, hi. You need to unmute yourself.
Thanks very much. This was very helpful in terms of when you're bifurcated, like most of us, with one foot in a social justice, eco-justice world, and another foot in a highly, what I call my, my berry world, right? I was practically a founder of a group called the Elderberry Connection. So you get my connection with that world. But here's my question to you. When I talk with people about making choices, and you were very helpful with this, so in an indirect way, you've answered my question, but I'd like to hear you speak about it quickly. People talk about, oh, you're a fatalist. So where does this whole accusation of how to address fatalism, how would you speak to that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So fatalism is a word. Philosophy of language was my favorite course in all my undergraduate and graduate work. And fatalism is a word with a negative connotation. When you even say a fatalist, oh, he's a fatalist. Well, how is that different than someone who has faith in God or trusts reality? If I trust reality as it is, not as I wish it was, but if I'm a yes to life as it really shows up, that's a positive way of saying what could be said with a derogatory tone. Oh, you're just a fatalist. And people who use that kind of language often are hitting the hopium pipe. They believe that if enough of us do this, or enough of us do that, if we just vote this way, if we just do that, then we can whatever. And if you are coming from a place of saying, no, that's not the nature of reality. That's not the flow of life. That's not the flow of the river. You're going to probably be labeled a fatalist, and it's probably unavoidable. So I just say, just love those people, just love them as they are and exactly as they're not, and don't let it worry you.
No,
I
your
do want to say
earlier
one
comments
thing.
are very helpful.
I do want to say one quick thing about the universe story, epic of evolution, big history, what Connie and I call the great story. That is the story that includes and embraces all other stories. I have actually had some challenge recently in the last several years in terms of the way many people still interpret big history. I was asked, for example, by the editor of the International Big History Forum to review a 3-volume anthology on big history. And I spent 2 months reading these essays, and I finally had to send the volumes back and say, I'm the wrong guy, I can't do it. Because so much of big history is still very techno-optimist, sort of like from the caves to now to the stars. They have this Star Trek vision of the future, which is, in my world, utterly delusional, even though I evangelized that perspective for 12 years. So I don't even recommend my own book, Thank God for Evolution. It was endorsed by 6 Nobel Prize winning scientists and more than 120 other science and religion leaders. I don't recommend my own book because it has this element of progressivism that I now think is utterly delusional. So,
thank you, Michael. They have obviously given us a lot to think about. I'd like to just let everyone take a minute or so to just kind of let soak in what you heard and how it's hitting you right now, and see what you're letting go of and what you're clinging to.
and if you wake up tomorrow morning and think to yourself, Michael Dowd must be wrong, be okay with that. I promise I will be.
Well, we can argue with you again one more time. So you can wake up and say that if you want to, but then next month you can have Adam right here in person. So please come back. We'll take you farther along next week. So I thank you all for coming. May you bring this back to those that you love and those who are now decided to love, despite what they are saying and doing, so that we might have a meaningful month between now and August 4th, where we begin to try out what we've heard today.
And August 4th will be much more nurturing, spiritually edifying. I mean, it really will be focusing 85% on sort of the, okay, it's like this, okay, this is real. Now, what's possible? And supporting each other and living in that place of possibility, given full acceptance of reality. So that's what we're focusing on next month.
Great. Now, Bob, do you have time, or would you like to offer some time? Thank you, Michael. Let's all just thank you. Give your hands or whatever you're got here to say. Thank you. Thank you. So we are very grateful. We're very grateful. Oh, Penny, you're back. Do you want to say anything before we go?
Just to Fred Lamott is a phenomenal poet who talks about this, and I could close with a poem that I think touches on Michael's sentiment, and I just hope my internet holds out for it. This sense that something went wrong, this sense that we have fallen and taken the world down with us, the sense that all might have turned out better had we not made some colossal mistake in the beginning, the sense that nature disapproves of us, and every flower is shouting about the impending cataclysm. Dear friend, don't you know that humans hesitate and cower before uncertainty, age after age? It's how we feel when we don't know how to breathe, when we don't know how to pause between heartbeats. Some say heaven will appear when this tribulation is over. I say heaven is an infinitesimal grain of silence at the tip of your exhalation, just before receiving the gift of another breath. Meet me here. We'll dance barefoot on the pointless bindu in the hollow between desires. Our desolation will explode into sparkling wine. We'll crush the dark cluster of our bittersweet wanting in a downpour of radiance, and found both fear and hope in gold, outrageous joy.
Amen.
All right. So let me do the same. If you'd
Thank
like
you,
to say-
Michael.
I'm just honored to be with you all, and I so appreciate the heart. I realize how difficult this material is to receive. And I look forward to being with you again next month. And please do explore some of the more nurturing pastoral videos and other materials on the postdoom.com website. And the conversations, like with Joanna Macy and Meg Wheatley, especially Joanna Macy and Meg Wheatley. I have 2 conversations with both of them, priceless. And then, as I mentioned, the Karen Perry one on 15 benefits. Good stuff.
Thank you. All right. Okay. So.
All right.
And I can I, yes, I think I can. I can save the chat, right? Yes. So if I go to the bottom
yes.
and click the 3 dots.
Oh, yes, because you're a co-host. Yes. Is that right?
Nope.
I don't know,
Yes.
Bob. Yes.
Yeah, so I'm going to save the chat. That way I'll respond to whatever questions may be in there, because I haven't had time to look at the chat.
No,
Just click onto the 3 little dots.
Yes.
Yeah, just in case, Michael, I get a copy of it. I'll send it to you as well, just in case.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob. Thanks.
All right. So I will stop our recording now, and then any who would like to stick around for a few minutes and do what we call mingling and just say hello to friends and whatever, that we can do that for a short while. Thanks.
And you can unpin me.
Okay.